Hi all. We will be getting going as close to 1 o'clock as possible. Just waiting on more people to join before we actually get kicked off. So, about 2 minutes there before we actually kick off. Hi, folks. Hope you're all well on this hopefully sunny Wednesday in September. Long overdue summer is now kicked in. My name's Colin Finnegan. I am the National Rugby Development Manager with Irish Rugby. As part of today's recording, or today's webinar, we just want to make sure that you're aware that it will be automatically recorded. So again, if you need to jump out at any second, please feel free. In terms of our question and answer function is now fully open, so feel free to get any questions into there and we will try to get through as many as possible. We also have received a number of questions in advance of today, so we'll be working our way through those as we go along. A couple of key messages, I suppose, just to start us off to make sure that we kick off on the right foot. Thank you. Okay, there's been a massive interaction. There's a massive integration of what the new tackle law has been, and people across Ireland have really bought into the process. We know that we're there for the right reasons, which is in the end player safety. We're constantly striving to go and improve player safety, and taking part in a trial of this nature is a huge way of us going and gathering the data, some of which you'll see later on, to go and make sure that we make informed decisions in this regard. It's for the players of current times as well as the players of the future. We want to make sure that this is an enjoyable and safe game as well. In terms of the data that we're going to be looking at, it comes from three sources, and Katrina will go and bring us through some of those in a moment. But it's really important to say that this is a snapshot of some of the data from year one of a 2-year trial. So again, not to be overawed by any of the findings currently, and not to go and to maybe take them as a finalized outcome. It is a snapshot of where we stand currently, with an awful lot more data, even from last season, to come and be added in within that. I suppose in terms of everything we do, as part of our respect our game, we look for positive behaviours on the sideline. And in terms of on the pitch, then we're looking for positive behaviours in what we do. Everything that we do here is going to be led by the behaviours of the players, coaches, supporters. And that's what we're trying to do, is to continue that interaction and that integration going forward, and to make sure that we're answering any queries as we go. Without further ado, I will happily pass you on to Katrina Yeomans. So Katrina is the medical manager for the developmental and domestic game with Irish Rugby, and she's going to go and bring us through some of the insights of the data from the first year of the trial. Katrina?
Perfect. Thank you so much, Collie. And thanks everyone for joining on your lunch break. I'm just going to share my screen here. So if I can just get a thumbs up, maybe, Colin, that's all working fine. We'll take silence as golden. So as we said, we're just going to bring you through a real brief snapshot of some of the findings from season one. And as Colin mentioned, it's only part of the data, and we have a huge amount of data coming at us this year. So it's just really as a checkpoint to see where we are, and maybe where we need to go for season two. And then obviously it'll give us an indication of what we're even looking around for that end of season two analysis, which will be a little bit more broad and a little bit more comprehensive. But I suppose just to take us back maybe about over a year and a half ago, nearly 2 years ago, how we got to this point. So I suppose we had been looking at some of our injury data from ourselves, and also some published studies from different cohorts, such as the Stellenbosch research group, who were looking in South Africa, and the French Union, who were looking at a trial in the community game around the tackle height in relation to player welfare. And ultimately, after reviewing some of that medical data and then having a really thorough engagement with the community game as a whole here, that consultation process led us to deciding to lower that tackle height for 2 seasons. And I suppose, why did we go with this line of the sternum? Well, when we looked at some of the data from the professional game, and just say that this is from the professional game from World Rugby, we do see that the majority of head injury assessments, so head impact events that would result in someone coming off for an assessment of a concussion, were occurring in that kind of red zone, which was anything from that line of the axilla up towards the head and neck. And that if we took out that area, we're in a much safer green zone. And now it's not to say that you'd be getting 0 injuries in that green zone area, but it's just to say that the likelihood is a lot lower, as you can see there. So that's why we've gone with this below the line of the sternum. And I just wanted to flag that for us all here before we get into the depths of some of the data. We all know that at the start of the season, we then went out and there was various coaching resources, and we ran webinars. The referees have had a huge engagement around what this looks like when we're trying to roll it out. But from my point of view, coming from the medical side of things, we're looking at the research. And part of that is our ongoing injury surveillance, which is coming from the University of Limerick. So this is a project that has been up and running since 2016, looking at injury trends across the men's and women's domestic game, and also the schoolboy game as well. We're probably one of the unions who are in a really unique position, that we have data going back to 2016, 2017, that we can use to compare then following the implementation of this law and how that looks going forward. So we're in a really strong position to do a really good job in properly understanding what's going on in this tackle height trial. But we also know that the injuries only tell us one story. They're just going to tell us what that trend is, whether it's going up, whether it's going down. It doesn't really give us too much more context. So we've also partnered with Trinity College Dublin and the Lero Foundation, who are going to be looking at some video analysis. We're going to align this with the World Rugby Video Analysis Code Work and Framework. And we'll be looking at a cohort again across all levels of the game. So we'll be looking at senior men's and women's, all the way down to some age grade games as well. So that has just started. We have a PhD student who's joined us to conduct this work. So we look forward to seeing how that looks going forward. But I suppose we have to also remember that no matter what the data is telling us, we also need to understand what the perception of the game is and how you feel on the ground. It is looking, how the game feels, and your voice is really, really important in this. So we're also going to do some stakeholder feedback. So we again added another PhD student down in the University of Limerick to help us with this. So they're going to be doing some surveys now that we're at the end of season one, to see how that rollout has gone and how you feel the game has been shaped over the last season. And then it'll be followed up at the end of season two with some semi-structured interviews or focus groups. So just to say that there is a huge amount of resource and work going on behind the scenes here. And I'm just going to show you a really, really brief snapshot of what that looks like. And we're just going to focus on the men's AIL for a moment. And again, we've just taken a snapshot of pre-trial, so the 2022-2023 season, and then post-trial, so the 23-24 season. And what we can see overall is that there's been a decrease in injury rates from the pre-trial season to the post-trial season. So it's a small enough decrease, and sometimes we do get seasonal variation. I think if you all reflect maybe on seasons you've had in your own club or in your own school, some years you just seem to have a bad year with injuries and some years you don't. So again, it's nice to always see the trend going down, but just to say it's a small variation. What we do see, though, if we just take concussion specifically, quite a sharp decrease in concussion rates. So there's quite a significant drop. Um, we've gone from 9.1 concussions per 1,000 player hours all the way down to 4.4 concussions per 1,000 player hours. Now, what does 1,000 player hours mean? So that's approximately 4.4 concussions per 750 matches. Okay, so we're talking really, really low numbers here. And if you think about that in your school, or your school or your club, probably equating to one player sustaining a concussion on average every, 30, 40 matches. Okay, so every 2 seasons maybe. So it's that while this is really nice to see, it's just again a small snapshot, but it is a nice finding to have at this point after one trial. If we just take those concussions, the majority of them are occurring in the tackle. And what we can see is actually we've seen an increase in the tackler related concussions, but the ball carrier ones as a percentage of the total concussions has actually remained fairly stable. So tackler concussions have gone up a little bit, ball carrier has remained kind of neutral, but overall the number of concussions have come down for us. And now, as I said, the injury data, thanks to Iris, will only give us one side of the story. So when we looked at some videos, and again, we took 8 videos in the pre-trial and 7 videos in the post-trial from the men's AIL, we can see on video that the number of head impacts has also decreased. So again, this is kind of echoing the fact that we've seen less concussion injuries, but we've also seen a decrease in the number of head impacts occurring. So that went from an average of 5.7 head impacts per match down to 4.4 head impacts per match on average. Interestingly, the rate of tackles has remained the same. So we're still seeing on average the same number of tackles occurring in the game, but the number of head impacts occurring across that game has decreased. Now, for the purposes of this brief analysis that we did over the summer, we just decided to draw the line across that lower line of the sternum where that law trial has started. So the tackles were either coded as being above that line or below that line, but we didn't look anywhere else in particular or break that down any further. So when we look across that line, actually the percentage of tackles that were below the lower line of the sternum, so coming into that below the belly, kind of hip, knee, ankle area, was approximately the same, went from 59% to 60%. And then the ones that were going above the line of the sternum, so again, maybe into that torso area, was also the same. So we do need to break this down a little bit further. And I think that's going to be what we're looking at for now the season 2 of the trial, is breaking down those areas a little bit further, because obviously if we're seeing less head impacts, but the number of tackles that were occurring above that line of the sternum has actually stayed the same, we need to decide, is it, or need to figure out if it's actually that now that we're going in at that line of the sternum, if the tackle is a little bit high, you're still in a relatively safe zone in terms of head impact, because you're going to be kind of from that nipple line maybe down to that lower line of the sternum, versus previously under the old law where you would have had the lower line of the axilla was the tackle height, and if you went a little bit too high there, you were in a dangerous zone for a head impact. So it's something really interesting for us to look at as we go forward with it. And then if we look at the ball carrier, so we do see that the ball carrier was a little less upright going into carries, but also then coming into a carry a little bit more bent. So that's something else we're just going to have to address, is that kind of ball carrier behavior in relation to this, because we've always said it's not just about the height, it's also about your tackle technique, and then also about the ball carrier behavior. So that'll be something interesting for us to get a little bit more findings on. The rest of the game metrics that we would have looked at, such as your ball and play time, your number of offloads, line out scrums, things like that, they were all relatively stable. So again, the game as a whole doesn't look like it's changed too much, but these are just a couple of the key findings in relation to that tackle event that we thought were good to share with you at this stage. Just want to say as well, look, this is some preliminary findings. We will be releasing a report on it tomorrow, but none of this has been published. So if we could just try and maybe keep this off Twitter or off your social medias, said happy for you to discuss this and share it with people that are key in your clubs and schools. But until then, as I said, we'll just keep this conversation up, because it's only, as I said, season 1 of a findings of a 2-year trial. So we don't know what the season 2 is going to look like yet. With the women's AIL, again, I just want to briefly flag some of the findings here. So what we do see is that the injury rates overall have decreased again this most recent season compared to the previous season, but the concussion rates themselves have remained stable. Now, one of the things we do find in the women's IRIS study is that we have a low number of women's clubs participating, and therefore we have a low number of injuries and concussions to actually analyse. So apart from giving you that kind of raw data of the injury rates have decreased and the concussions stay stable, can't really say too much more about it because we had so few clubs participating. So it makes it really hard to interpret it. So I have put my email at the start of the slide, and I'm more than happy for people to get in touch with me if they'd be interested in seeing how they can maybe be part of this. Because without that injury information or without that data, it makes it really hard to determine what's the impact that we're having. And then obviously we haven't looked at the video yet in the women's IL, but it is going to be part of the PhD going forward on the video analysis. So that might help us better understand why we're not seeing any changes here the same way that we might have seen in the men's yet. And then in the schools, again, we can see that the injury rate has decreased from one season to last season, but the concussion rate has also remained stable. Now, we do have a good few school SCT teams involved in IRIS, so we have a little bit more data to work with and try and interpret. So what we can see here is that there's been quite a significant increase in the tackler-related concussions. However, the ball carrier has also had a slight increase, even though the overall rate has remained stable. But where we did see the decrease was actually in the ruck, but we haven't yet looked at the video to try and see why that is or what way that game has changed in that school's game. So again, just something to bear in mind around the area of tackle technique and also that ball carrier behaviour, to see why we're seeing what we're seeing here in that data. And said the video will hopefully help us with that going forward. So I suppose, look, where are we now and what's next? Like, we are having an impact, and I think that's a nice thing to come to at the end of season 1, is that we are seeing an impact across the game. But it's not just about the height. And I've said this a couple of times now, it's always been about the behaviours. So we really need to look at our coaching resources and how we are coaching players around tackle technique. And also then, do we need to start looking at ball carrier behaviour? Because again, if we're seeing that the ball carrier is becoming relatively safe when you're getting that tackler's head out of their space, we now need to see how we can help protect the tackler. And I think the areas we need to look at are the tackle technique and the ball carrier behaviour. So as I said, there are resources available. So do get in touch and see where you can start looking at these to see how we can better improve that tackle related concussions that we are seeing. The video analysis is obviously going to be a big area of focus for us for the coming season. As I said, we have a number of videos that we want to code, so we are going to have hours and hours of data to look at. So I think it will be a really good finding. And then, as I said, also the stakeholder feedback. So this is where your voice comes into it. And I said it's really important to have your say, because the data, we can throw data at you all day, but again, if we're not seeing that the game is as enjoyable, that players are performing, that needs to be taken into consideration as well. So we do have a survey that is live at the moment. So again, this is totally voluntary. It is totally anonymous. It's being run by the University of Limerick, and the survey is anonymous. To complete it, it'll only take you about 10 minutes. QR code there, or there is a link, and I think we'll also put the link in the chat box as well. It is specific to your role. So if you select that you're a referee, the questions will be around the refereeing side of the game. If you select that you're a player, it'll be around the player. And there's a few questions that are the same for both. So do please get involved, share it widely. As I said, the more people that we have having their say in this, the better it helps us understand what's actually going on the ground, so that we can make the game more enjoyable for you. I'm happy to take any questions, but I think we'll hand back to Collie now. We might do questions at the end if that suits everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks a million, Katrina. Yeah, so just on that survey link, that's just been popped into the chat function for anyone who wants to go and complete that. And again, your voice is hugely important, so please make sure you go and use it whenever you get the opportunity. In terms of our question and answers, as I say, we've been getting a few questions in there through the question and answer function. Please keep them coming in. Obviously, a lot of information there, and a lot of positive information. But again, just a snapshot of where we are. So nothing to get too head up about just yet. But I think it is important within that one of the key things we spoke about within doing this law trial is the fact that we will go and review it ourselves as well as through World Rugby to make sure that it is applicable and it works for Irish rugby, and so the people who are invested in our game. So don't worry, that is a constantly evolving and ongoing piece of work, and we will make sure that decisions then that come from this are the best for Irish rugby. Moving on now, I'm going to bring in Peter Fitzgibbon. So Peter is the domestic referee manager for Irish Rugby. And Peter's going to go and have a quick chat in around the match official view. He's going to show us some clips and some examples of certain tackles that have happened in this season. And then he's also going to have the opportunity to go and speak about the 3 law changes that World Rugby have brought into our game at all levels from the start of this season. So, Peter.
Thanks, Colin. And thanks everyone for attending today. Just to follow on from Katrina's briefing there on the preliminary results of the tackle height law trial that has been occurring last season and into this season. I suppose the message we've given to referees, every referee in the country has had access to pre-season seminar and other follow-up workshops at which the tackle height, amongst other things, has been central. And the message is quite simple to referees. If players bend at the waist, it's most likely that their tackle will be legal. And if players come into the tackle upright, that there's a very good chance that they will be penalised. In fact, nearly all situations like that where the players attempting to tackle in an upright position will end up being penalised. So I'll just share a couple of examples, if I may, from recent games, just of high tackles and kind of the player behaviour that the referees are looking out for. So this is a recent match in Connacht Senior League between Galwegians and Sligo. And you'll see here a ball carrier from Sligo in the yellow and black and red jersey. And I'll slow this down for you so you can see it. One player goes in nice and low and the other player is in high. So both players must go below the sternum in that situation. So heads and shoulders in a similar space, and referee quite correctly penalises it. Okay, and we see it in real speed. Okay. And deemed low force by the referee, so therefore penalty only high tackle. Yeah, and then a second example from the same match. Apologies, wrong one. Again, we see here ball carrier coming around, potential tackler in the blue jersey, and doesn't bend at the waist, comes in upright, puts his head in the same space as the ball carrier and causes a potential dangerous situation. Again, it's low to medium force here, so it's up to the referee's discretion then as to how they judge it in terms of force. There's no high impact head contact here, so it wouldn't be a red card situation, but potentially yellow or red. Okay, and again, referee signals for advantage here in that he deems it to be a penalty. So this message is the same as last year. Coming into the tackle upright is high risk, and coming in bent at the waist is what we want to see from the players. In terms of other areas of the game, then we have some new laws in this year across the board. Those laws are in globally, and they'll be in use and already have been in use indeed in the domestic game. So I'm going to give a brief presentation on the 3 law changes that we have coming into the game this year globally at all levels. Okay, the crocodile roll action, clearing out at the breakdown, is now prohibited, and I'll go through each one in more detail shortly. If you're awarded a free kick, you no longer have the option of taking a scrum. and if players who are offside in open play ahead of a kicker, if they were outside of 10 metres where the ball was landing, they had the option of standing still and waiting to be brought onside. That option has now been taken away and they must retreat. Okay, so I'll go through each one in more detail shortly. But other law trials that you may have seen, such as 60 seconds for conversions, 20-minute red cards, they're trials which took place in other closed competitions, such as Under-20 World Championship, International Championship involving Southern Hemisphere countries. They are not in use in the domestic game or elite game in Europe. So it's only the three you see up in green there are the ones that are in play this season. Okay, and there'll be a link to some World Rugby resources explaining all of those three, and I'll put those in the chat shortly, and you can link into those then for a very detailed explanation and some other resources, including video clips and explainers on those in more detail. So in terms of the croc roll then, and it comes under law 9.20 and law 14.8, which is foul play and dangerous play. So crocodile roll is defined as a prohibited action where a player laterally rolls or twists or pulls a player who was on their feet in the tackle area to ground. And the action often results on the player clearing out, landing on the player's lower limbs. And we've seen a lot of examples in the professional game and some in the domestic game, fairly severe injuries to ankles, knees and hamstrings as a result of this action, and therefore on a player welfare basis it is now being prohibited. Referees will look out for in the clearing out of the breakdown a twisting action where someone pulls or rolls or twists a jackal and drops the weight onto their or near their lower limbs, or a pulling action where they pull a jackler and drop their weight onto them, or pull a jackler on or around the head or neck, or pull a jackler forward onto their heads or necks. Okay. And the awareness trigger for referees here will be if we see a jackler in a strong position, a contest for possession, croc rolls, and indeed other dangerous actions such as entering the breakdown in a shoulder charge manner with no grasp, they're more likely to occur. So when there's a threat to the possession, it's when this foul play is more likely to occur. So that will be something that should trigger an awareness for a referee that we potentially are going to have foul play. The level of sanction then will depend on, as we've always said, the degree of danger of the action. So a penalty only, or maybe penalty yellow card, is a croc roll with a drop on or near the lower limbs with low or medium danger. And a red card offence will be a croc roll with a drop onto the lower limb or causing hyperextension of the leg, which is deemed to be high danger. That's what causes those fairly severe injuries to ankles, knees and hamstrings, what we've seen in the evidence we've looked at in this regard. Okay, so that's the croc roll one, and there's a really good video on the World Rugby site with the World Rugby breakdown consultant using players and showing the actions which have been outlawed, but also the reasons why. Okay. No scrum option and a free kick. So how that's going to be applied is if you're awarded a free kick in the past, you could have taken a scrum. That's no longer possible. So how some stuff around the law application here, particularly a lot of questions come in, and what about a team with a weaker scrum now looking to exploit that law change, destabilising the scrum. The stronger scrums awarded a free kick but don't have the option of taking another free kick. So how referees are going to deal with that? They'll look to manage or sanction these situations appropriately, particularly with regard to if they feel the team are deliberately infringing. That can be sanctioned with a penalty, and you do have the option at a penalty to go for a scrum. You don't have it at a free kick. And repeat offences can be escalated to a penalty kick as well. So that's how the referees will look to manage those situations. What we anticipate in this regard with free kicks, we'll expect a lot more quick taps, particularly free kicks awarded at scrums. So what the referees will be looking to do is facilitate those quick taps when possible, but they must be taken from the correct place, which is directly behind the mark, near the number 8 position, and not at the side of the scrum. In the domestic game in Ireland, it is not possible to take a quick quick tap, at a collapse scrum for safety reasons. Referee needs to be sure that the players are back up on their feet before they'll allow play to continue. And where there are quick taps, particularly at a scrum, defending players must be back 10 metres, and those who aren't 10 metres must retreat. So in a couple of, what we often see is with a quick tap here, the players who were in the scrum, maybe back row players, don't retreat and come forward and tackle immediately. And we've asked referees to be very aware of that and make sure that the team who've been awarded a free kick and who are taking a quick tap get the 10-metre space that they're entitled to. Then for offside and open play and kicks, there is a change to this. So the key message here is that all players ahead of the kicker, including those outside of 10 metres from where the ball is caught or lands, must immediately retreat towards their own goal line and continue to retreat until brought onside. So focus here in the laws, generally law 10, which refers to offside and open play. Players loitering in an offside position, players making no effort to retreat from an offside position, and opponents passing the ball or running 5 metres with it no longer puts an offside player onside. So everyone must continue to retreat until they're put onside by the action of their teammate. This has become known in some circles as the DuPont law because the French were managed to use this law to their advantage in recent matches. So they've made a change around that to protect space, the teams receiving a kick. Okay, again, how it's going to be applied. Players in front of the kicker must retreat and continue to retreat until they're put onside. Players outside of 10 metres who are retreating can still be put onside by a teammate or by the action of an opponent. The action of opponent that puts them onside is an opponent intentionally playing the ball but not gaining possession, or indeed kicking the ball. So now we're back into an open play scenario again. Players within 10 metres of where the ball is landing cannot be put onside by the action of an opponent. And the focus of referees will be on players nearest to where the ball is landing and working backwards. Referees will try and manage these situations, but that won't always be possible. They'll try and get players to retreat. But if players become material quite quickly, without the referee having time to manage those situations, they'll just have to give a penalty straight away. So the message to players is, if you're ahead of the kicker, you must retreat until you're brought onside. If the ball goes into touch, that does now no longer automatically put players back onside. Okay, they must continue to retreat. The ball is still live, so if there's a quick throw in possible, again, players who are ahead of the kicker must continue to retreat until they're brought onside. Once the referee blows the whistle to signal line-out's going to take place, or the assistant referee or TJ's arm goes out to signal that a line-out's going to take place, that's the act that makes the ball dead and players can move to the line of touch. And finally, with long kicks that are going a significant distance down the pitch, so often those players are brought on side quite quickly. They're a long way from where the ball is landing and they have no impact on the receiver's options. They're not ones the referees are going to chase. It's more on the shorter kicks where offside players are more likely to have a material impact. They should be sanctioned if they don't retreat immediately. Okay, and materiality is key for refereeing. So we're not going on a witch hunt here. It's going to be offside players who materially impact on the receiver's options. They're the ones that the referees should be picking up. And if there is a penalty awarded, the penalty is at the place of infringement where the player is offside, or a scrum from where the ball is scrum back from where the ball was kicked, and that can often be a significant distance. Okay, so that's a summary of the new law changes, and I've just put the link to the World Rugby resources on these global law changes in the chat as well. And if you click on that link, that'll take you to some significant information on that. And as ever, if you have any questions on law and law application, particularly related to referee queries, if it's at a national competition, you can contact myself directly. And if it's in a provincial competition, we have a referee development manager in each province who can maybe deal with your query. And all those contact details are on the Irish Rugby website in the refereeing section of Playing the Game. Thank you.
Cheers, Fitzy. Appreciate that. Really good overview of what the match officials' decision-making processes are regarding those the three law changes, and also in terms of reinforcing that messaging from our tackle behaviours trial. Folks, appreciate you staying with us tonight. We've kind of come to the question and answer part of our webinar today. So, we'll have a few questions come in the chat, and we've a few more that we've received earlier in advance of it as well. If you have any questions, please feel free to continue to send them in, and we will either get to them today or we will go and circle back to them at a later date. I suppose I'll take one of the pre-questions from slightly earlier, one of the ones that was sent in. So, are there further area or changes to the area of this game that are being actively considered? In terms of that, we're going to make sure that we stay ahead and aware of all trends. Katrina spoke about, that idea of players carrying the ball carrier being slightly more bent over now going into contact, around how the unintended consequences of any sort of change or adaptation or trial and what that may create. So we'll be making sure that we are staying aware of everything that's happening, that we're thoroughly investigating. There's nothing changed, or there's no changes planned as of this moment, but in terms of editing, just as we've done with this tackle adaptation, we will make sure that all our stakeholders are fully involved and invested as we go along. I'm going to go and bring in Katrina for our next questions. So we have 3 questions that have come in. And the first one is from Andy. Has there been any increase in numbers of head injuries or any related injuries relating to the tackler or tackle assist going through this trial period?
Yeah, thanks for that. So we obviously have seen that the tackler related head injuries or concussions have gone up. As I said, it's a brief snapshot, so whether we see that trend continue or not, and we don't know. And also, we didn't look to see whether there was head impact with any particular body part, such as a hip or a knee, as opposed to that kind of shoulder or head where we might have traditionally seen it. So those are things we're definitely going to look at in more detail as we go forward. But so far, based off the first season, slightly more of an increased risk to the tackler.
Perfect. Thanks, Katrina. And again, just to re-emphasize that the data is in its very initial stages, so we'll make sure we have full findings out whenever we have them at post the second year of the trial. Katrina, we'll stay with yourself. A question that's come in the chat from Jeremy. I'd be interested to know if the injury rates were stable in the preceding years before the trial started.
Yeah, so interestingly, we always have a little bit of seasonal variation where, you might see hamstring injuries have gone up one season and shoulder injuries have gone down or whatever. But on a whole, over the last number of years that we've been working with Iris, we have seen them remain fairly steady. Like there's always a little bit of an increase or decrease, but particularly like in the men's game, the head, the hamstring, and the ankle are often the 3 big heavy hitters. The women's game, it can kind of fluctuate a little bit between head, knee, ankle, and sometimes it said shoulder coming in there. So we do see some seasonal variation, but on the whole, they were fairly steady going forward. So it gives us a really nice platform to work off over the next couple of years as we look at the impact of this trial.
Perfect. Just to pick up on one, I'll take myself. It's have players expressed noticing any changes in head contact as a result of the trial. So I think a key part is that we have the survey link that is in the chat function, and we want your feedback. We want to make sure that the players have a voice within all of this as well. So please circulate that link to all people that you can, because then we can go and garner that information from them as well. I'm going to bring in Peter now, just in terms of a couple of match official related questions. So Peter, the first one is from Johnny. Was there a higher number of yellow and red cards over the course of the season or in particular phases of the season?
Yes is the answer, simply put. So in the preceding season before the tackle height law trial, there were 39 red cards in All-Ireland League. There were 55 last season, so an increase of 16. The number of red cards issued because of a double yellow increased significantly, and that accounted for most of the increase. And the majority of the red cards were in the first half of the season. So while I'm speculating a little bit, I'm putting that down to the adjustment period for players as we came into high intensity games. But we saw as we analyse games over the course of the season, we've definitely seen a gradual but steady change in player behaviour, where the rate of red cards and yellow cards has dropped off as the season progressed, and there was a spike in the last 3 rounds. Again, probably due to being a lot more at stake in those games, promotion, playoff, semi-finals, and relegation. With a lot at stake in those games, we did see an increase in disciplinary sanctions, yellow and red cards, due to the increased intensity of those matches.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah, and look, I think a really good summary there of how things have happened, and we spoke about this. The trial will take time to embed and to fully bed in all of our leagues and all of our sections. So, important thing is that the interaction we've had with all of our stakeholders, match officials, players, coaches, medics, supporters, people have really bought in and wanted to be part of this. The second question for yourself, Peter, is: does grabbing your opponent's jersey at the neck constitute an infringement?
Yes, that would be considered a high tackle. So, as in previous years prior to the tackle law trial, any contact above the line of the shoulders is an illegal tackle. So, grabbing an opponent by the collar is foul play in itself and should be penalised.
Perfect. Thanks, Peter. No, look, a really, really good insight into everything there. And thank you so much to everyone for your questions and for joining us on today's webinar. In terms of further contact from here, you'll see there will be an article going live over the next day, where we'll actually go and share some of the findings. As Katrina said, please try not to share things in isolation. We want to make sure that everyone is as fully informed as possible within this, but we really appreciate you taking the time this lunchtime to jump on and to join us here for a bit of an insight into the first year of our tackle height trial. Without further ado, I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone, and enjoy the rest of your lunch. Thanks, folks.